I was eating breakfast when I saw the construction crew roll up to the corner of my property at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. My name is Peter Lawson, and I had lived at 2847 Oakmont Drive in suburban Phoenix, Arizona for 3 years. The house sat on a large corner lot, which was one of the reasons I bought it in the first place. The extra land gave me privacy and breathing room from my neighbors. Now, watching from my kitchen window as workers in orange vests began unloading materials, I felt that privacy shrinking by the second. I walked outside in my pajama pants and t-shirt, coffee mug in hand. The Arizona sun was already warming up, promising another hot day. A middle-aged woman with blonde highlights and a clipboard stood near a white SUV directing the crew. She wore khaki capris and a turquoise blouse that screamed suburban authority. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching her. "What's going on here?" She turned to me with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning. You must be Mr. Lawson. I'm Brenda Patterson, the president of the Oakmont Estates Homeowners Association." "Yeah, I know who you are," I said. "What I don't know is why there are construction workers on my property." Brenda's smile tightened. "This isn't your property, Mr. Lawson. According to the community plat map, this corner section is designated as common area space. We're building a dog park for the neighborhood." I nearly spit out my coffee. "Common area. This is my lot. I maintain this grass. I water it. I pay property taxes on it." "I understand your confusion," Brenda said, though her tone suggested she understood nothing of the sort. "When you purchased your home, you agreed to the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The CCRs clearly state that certain portions of corner lots may be utilized for community amenities." "That's insane. Nobody ever mentioned that when I bought this place." Brenda pulled a document from her clipboard and held it out to me. "This was emailed to all residents last month, detailing our plans for neighborhood improvements. The dog park was approved by the board unanimously." I snatched the paper from her hand. It was dated from February, buried in the kind of dense legal language that most people would skim or ignore entirely. At the bottom was a notice stating that, without written objection within 14 days, all residents were deemed to be in agreement with the proposed changes. "I never saw this email," I said. "That's not our problem. We fulfilled our notification requirements. The construction is proceeding as planned." I stood there, watching as workers began marking out areas with spray paint, sectioning off a portion of land that extended at least 20 feet into what I considered my yard. The corner lot was being carved up like a holiday turkey. "How much of my property are you taking?" "Approximately 800 square feet. Again, it's not technically your property. It's common area." "Then why have I been maintaining it for 3 years?" Brenda shrugged. "Many residents take pride in caring for the common areas adjacent to their homes. It's what makes Oakmont Estates such a beautiful community." She turned back to the construction crew, effectively dismissing me. I stood there for another minute, feeling my blood pressure rise, then walked back inside. My coffee had gone cold, but my anger was burning hot. I spent the next hour on the phone with my real estate attorney, a guy named Marcus Chen who had helped me with the house purchase. He sounded groggy when he answered. "Peter, it's not even 8:30 in the morning. The HOA is building a dog park on my land." That woke him up. "What?" I explained the situation while listening to him type on his computer. After a few minutes of searching, he let out a long sigh. "Okay, I'm looking at the plat map and the HOA documents now. There is a clause about common area designation on corner lots. It's buried pretty deep in the CCRs, and honestly, I should have caught this during your purchase review. But Peter, the language is vague enough that it could be challenged." So I can stop them, maybe, but it would require filing an injunction, which means court time and legal fees. We're talking thousands of dollars, and there's no guarantee we'd win. I looked out the window. The workers were now digging post holes for a fence. How long would that take? Months, probably. In the meantime, they'd likely continue construction unless you can get a temporary restraining order, which is even harder to obtain. I thanked Marcus and hung up. Fighting this through the courts would be expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain. I needed to think smarter, not harder. The construction continued throughout the day. By evening, they had installed fence posts and began laying gravel for pathways. The dog park was taking shape quickly, a clear sign that the HOA had budgeted well for this project. I sat on my front porch, watching the sun set over my gradually disappearing corner lot, and an idea began forming. If the HOA wanted to use my land for a community amenity, then I was going to make sure I benefited from it too. The next morning, I called a fencing company. Within 2 days, I had quotes from 3 different contractors. I selected a company called Desert Barrier Solutions, run by a friendly guy named Tom who understood exactly what I needed. "So you want a fence with a gate that blocks access to this dog park?" Tom asked, studying the layout. "Exactly. The dog park is technically on what they're calling common area, but my property line runs right up to it. I want a fence along my actual property line that just happens to create the only easy access point to their new park." Tom grinned. "I've seen HOA disputes before, but this is creative. You know they're going to lose their minds. That's what I'm counting on." The fence went up over the next week. It was a beautiful 6-foot cedar privacy fence that ran along my true property line, which I had verified with a surveyor I hired for $800. The survey confirmed what I suspected. The HOA had built their dog park on land that was indeed designated as common area, but the only practical access point was through a section that bordered my property. The other sides were blocked by other houses, existing fences, and a drainage ditch. I installed a sturdy gate right at the corner, the only reasonable entry point to the dog park. The gate had a digital lock system that I could control from my phone. Above the gate, I mounted a professionally printed sign. "Oakmont Estates Dog Park Admission $5 per visit or $50 monthly pass. Cash, card, and Venmo accepted." I set up a small kiosk next to the gate with a card reader and a lockbox for cash. The whole setup cost me about $4,000, but I considered it an investment. Brenda showed up at my door exactly 3 hours after I opened for business. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her face red and blotchy. She had 3 other HOA board members with her, including a stern-looking man in his 60s and 2 women who appeared to be in their 50s. "I'm running a business," I said calmly. "The dog park is lovely, by the way." "Great work on that." "You cannot charge people to access common area amenities," Brenda said, practically spitting the words. "I'm not charging anyone to access the common area. I'm charging them to pass through my property, which is the only reasonable way to reach the dog park. See, you folks built the park on common area land, but you forgot to ensure there was common area access. The only way in is across my property line, right at this corner." My surveyor confirmed it. The stern man stepped forward. "I'm Donald Hughes, the HOA treasurer. We'll simply build another access point." "Feel free," I said. "But that means cutting through the Johnsons' yard on the west side, which is definitely not common area. Or you could try the east approach, but that requires removing the drainage ditch, which would violate county flood control regulations. Or the north side, but that's the Hendersons' property, and last I checked, They have an actual fence that's been there for 15 years. Your best bet is the south side, but that backs up to Montrose Street, which means you'd need to get city approval for a public access point from a residential street. Good luck with that permitting process. Brenda's face had gone from red to purple. This is extortion. This is capitalism. You built an amenity that's only accessible through my property. I'm simply monetizing the access. We'll sue you, Brenda threatened, and I'll countersue for the loss of property value and enjoyment of my land. I spoke with my attorney. You're welcome to pursue legal action, but I'm confident in my position. In the meantime, the dog park is open for business. Well, my access point is open for business. $5 a visit. One of the other women who had been silent until now spoke up. This is ridiculous. People aren't going to pay. Then I guess nobody will use the dog park. Seems like a waste of the HOA's money. How much did you spend on that, by the way? I'm guessing 15,000, maybe 20. Donald's expression confirmed I was in the right ballpark. Tell you what, I said. I'm a reasonable guy. The HOA can purchase an easement across my property for dog park access. I'll sell it for $50,000. That's highway robbery, Brenda gasped. That's the market rate for land in this neighborhood. Actually, I'm being generous, but the offer stands. $50,000 for a permanent easement, properly recorded and legally binding. Or you can let me run my little admission business. Either way works for me. They left in a huff, muttering threats about lawyers and violations and consequences. I went inside and made myself lunch. The first customer arrived that afternoon. A woman in her 30s with a golden retriever named Murphy. She looked at my sign, looked at me, and laughed. Is this for real? Completely real. $5 gets you and Murphy access to the brand new dog park. Monthly passes are available for $50 if you're a regular visitor. She shook her head in amazement but pulled out a $5 bill. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, but Murphy needs exercise. I've been looking forward to this park opening all month. I took her money, unlocked the gate with my phone, and let her through. Murphy bounded into the dog park, immediately investigating all the new smells. The park really was nice, I had to admit. The HOA had done a good job with artificial turf, water stations, and separate areas for large and small dogs. By the end of the first week, I had made $350. 23 different dogs had used the park, and 2 people had purchased monthly passes. Word was spreading through the neighborhood, and the reactions were mixed. Some people thought I was a genius. Others thought I was an asshole. I didn't particularly care either way. Brenda tried another approach the following Monday. She showed up with a police officer, which I found amusing. Officer Martinez, this man is illegally charging residents for access to community amenities, Brenda announced. Officer Martinez, a young guy who looked fresh out of the academy, studied my setup. Sir, can you explain what's going on here? Sure. The HOA built a dog park on common area land. The only practical access point crosses my private property at this corner. I'm charging a fee for people to cross my land to reach the park. It's no different than a private road charging a toll. Martinez looked at Brenda. Is the dog park on his property? No, it's on common area, she admitted. But the access point is. The gate is on his property line, yes. Martinez turned back to me. Do you have a business license? I pulled out my phone and showed him the digital copy. I had registered as a sole proprietorship with Maricopa County the day after I installed the gate. Cost me $150 and about an hour of paperwork online. Looks legitimate to me, Martinez said. Madam, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. If you have a dispute with this gentleman, you'll need to resolve it through the courts or your HOA procedures. After they left, I celebrated with a beer. The cops couldn't touch me, which meant Brenda's options were narrowing. Business picked up in the second week. I had 15 monthly pass holders now, which meant $750 in recurring revenue. Individual visits brought in another $200 that week. For doing basically nothing except unlocking a gate remotely from my phone, I was making decent side income. The HOA held an emergency meeting on a Thursday evening. I knew about it because several neighbors mentioned it to me, and because the HOA was required to post meeting notices. I decided to attend, curious to see what Brenda and her board would try next. The meeting was held at the Oakmont Estates Clubhouse, a modest building near the community pool. About 40 residents showed up, which was more than usual according to the neighbors I had befriended. The dog park controversy had people engaged. Brenda called the meeting to order and immediately launched into her complaint. As many of you know, one of our residents has taken it upon himself to charge admission to the new dog park. This goes against everything our community stands for. We are exploring legal options to stop this unauthorized business. A man in the back raised his hand. Why should he give away access across his property for free? The HOA should have planned better. Brenda's eyes flashed with anger. The dog park was built on common area land which belongs to all of us. But the access isn't common area, another resident called out. I looked at the plat map myself. You built a dog park that's only reachable through someone's private property. That's bad planning. The meeting devolved into chaos, with residents arguing both sides. Some people were angry at me for charging fees. Others were angry at the HOA for the poor planning. A few enterprising souls suggested the HOA just pay me for the easement and be done with it. Donald Hughes tried to restore order. The board has consulted with our attorney. We're exploring several options, including building an alternative access point or pursuing legal action against Mr. Lawson for interference with community amenities. How much will that cost? Someone asked. Donald hesitated. Legal action would require special assessment fees from all homeowners. We estimate approximately $200 per household. The room erupted again. People were not happy about paying extra fees, especially when an easier solution existed. I raised my hand. If I may. Brenda looked like she wanted to refuse, but too many people were watching. Mr. Lawson, you have the floor. I stood up. I've made you all a reasonable offer. $50,000 for a permanent easement across my property for dog park access. That's less than the cost of legal fees, less than building an alternative access point, and it solves the problem permanently. The HOA has the money. I know the annual budget is over $200,000. Use some of those funds for what's essentially fixing a planning mistake. We're not paying you $50,000 as a reward for your extortion, Brenda snapped. Then enjoy explaining to your neighbors why their HOA fees are going up for legal battles you'll probably lose. Or why the dog park that was supposed to be this great community amenity is sitting empty because nobody wants to pay me $5 to use it. A woman in her 40s stood up. I recognized her as Susan Miller, someone who had bought a monthly pass. Actually, lots of people are using the dog park. I have a monthly pass and it's been worth every penny. My dog loves it. This whole situation is ridiculous, but I'm not the one who messed up the access planning. Others nodded in agreement. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but it was clear the community was divided. Some people blamed me, but more people blamed the HOA for poor planning. By the time the meeting ended, nothing had been resolved except that the board was going to consult with their attorney again. I went home feeling pretty good about my position. The attorney's letter arrived a week later. delivered by certified mail. It was 5 pages of legal threats, basically demanding that I cease operating my admission gate immediately or face legal action. I forwarded it to Marcus Chen, my attorney. He called me an hour later. "They don't have much of a case, Peter. They're threatening to sue based on a clause in the CCRs about commercial activity, but you're not technically operating on HOA property. You're operating on your own land. I think they're bluffing." "So I should ignore it," draft a response through me. "We'll politely decline their demands and reiterate your offer to sell the easement. That's the smart play. Make them be the ones to file an actual lawsuit, which will cost them money up front." We sent a response letter that was professional but firm. I continued operating my gate. April arrived and brought more customers. The weather was perfect for dog walking, and the park was getting daily use. I now had 28 monthly pass holders and was seeing an average of 5 to 10 single-visit customers per week. My monthly revenue was approaching $2,000, which was basically a house payment. Brenda tried a different tactic. She sent official HOA violation notices to my house, claiming I was in breach of the CCRs for operating a business from my residence. I responded by pointing out that my business was not being operated from my residence, but from a gate on my property line, which was different. I also noted that several other residents in Oakmont Estates ran home businesses, including a woman who sold essential oils, a guy who did consulting work, and someone who gave piano lessons from their home. The violations were ignored by the HOA Enforcement Committee, probably because they realized the hypocrisy. Then, Brenda got creative. She organized a group of residents to start boycotting my gate. They held signs on the street corner during peak dog walking hours, encouraging people not to pay. The signs read things like, "Don't support greed," and "Community over profit." The protest lasted 3 days before fizzling out. Most people just didn't care enough to stand in the Arizona heat holding signs. Plus, the dog owners who had bought monthly passes kept using the park, walking past the protesters without a second glance. One evening in late April, I was grilling dinner when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find an older couple I recognized from the neighborhood. Jack and Patricia Henderson owned the house directly north of the dog park. "Mr. Lawson, could we talk to you for a moment?" Patricia asked. She looked tired with deep lines around her eyes. "Of course. Come in." They sat in my living room and Jack got straight to the point. "We wanted to propose something. The HOA's handling of this whole situation has been terrible. They never should have built the dog park without proper access. But at the same time, a lot of residents really wanted this amenity. Our daughter lives with us, and she has 2 dogs that would benefit from the park." "Okay," I said, wondering where this was going. Patricia leaned forward. "We're on a fixed income. $50 a month is manageable, but we were wondering if you'd consider a reduced rate for senior citizens or multiple dog households." It was a reasonable request, and these people were being polite about it, unlike Brenda. "How about this? $40 a month for seniors, and I'll add a family plan at $75 for households with 3 or more dogs. Does that work?" Their faces lit up. "That would be wonderful, thank you." After they left with their new senior monthly pass, I updated my pricing structure. The new options actually attracted more customers. By mid-May, I had 45 monthly pass holders and was bringing in over $2,300 per month. The HOA board held another meeting in May, and this time I wasn't invited despite it being about the dog park situation. I learned what happened from Susan Miller, who attended and filled me in afterward. "They voted to file a lawsuit," Susan told me over the phone. "Donald tried to argue for just buying the easement from you, but Brenda convinced the majority that it was about principle. They're hiring a law firm to pursue legal action. Did they say how much it would cost? $15,000 in retainer fees, with potential for more if it goes to trial. They're funding it through the reserve account. I thanked Susan for the information and called Marcus. He wasn't surprised. Let them sue. We'll file a motion to dismiss based on lack of standing and improper venue. Even if that doesn't work, discovery will be on our side. We'll subpoena their planning documents and show that they failed to secure proper access before building. Any competent judge will see this for what it is: poor planning by the HOA. The lawsuit was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court in early June. The complaint alleged that I was interfering with community amenities, operating an illegal business, and causing harm to property values. They were seeking an injunction to force me to allow free access across my property and monetary damages for the revenue I had collected. Marcus filed our response 3 weeks later. Our defense was straightforward. The HOA had no legal right to compel me to grant free access across my private property. My business was properly licensed and legal, and any harm to property values was caused by the HOA's own poor planning, not my gate. The discovery phase began, and that's when things got interesting. Marcus subpoenaed all documents related to the dog park planning, including emails, meeting minutes, and architectural plans. What we found was damning. The HOA had been warned by their own landscaping contractor that access might be an issue. The contractor had sent an email to Brenda specifically noting that the corner lot placement would require coordination with the property owner at 2847 Oakmont Drive. Brenda had responded to that email with, "The common area designation gives us the authority we need. Proceed with the build." Marcus was gleeful when he called me with the news. "Peter, they knew. They knew there would be an access issue and they built it anyway. This is willful negligence on the part of the board. We can use this." What does this mean for the case? It means we're going to file a counterclaim. We're going to argue that the HOA deliberately created this situation through negligence and poor planning, causing you harm and forcing you to incur legal expenses. We're going to ask for them to pay your attorney's fees and to purchase the easement at fair market value. The counterclaim was filed in July, and Brenda's response was to send me a letter threatening to revoke my membership privileges in the community. I responded that I didn't use any community amenities anyway, so she could revoke whatever she wanted. My gate business, meanwhile, continued to thrive. By August, I had 60 monthly pass holders and was making close to $3,000 a month. I had even expanded my services, offering dog waste bags, water bowl refills, and a small shelter area outside the gate where people could wait if the park was crowded. The case was scheduled for a hearing in September. Marcus and I arrived at the courthouse on a hot Tuesday morning. Brenda was there with Donald and the HOA's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Catherine Rodriguez. The judge, Honorable Robert Kellerman, was a no-nonsense type in his late 50s. He reviewed the filings and looked distinctly unimpressed with everyone. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," Judge Kellerman said. "The HOA built a dog park on common area land without ensuring proper access. Mr. Lawson then installed a gate on his property line and began charging admission to cross his land to reach the park. The HOA wants him to stop, and Mr. Lawson wants to be compensated for his legal fees and potentially sell an easement. Is that accurate?" Both attorneys confirmed it was. "This seems like something that could have been resolved without involving the court system," the judge observed dryly. "Miss Rodriguez, Does your client have evidence that Mr. Lawson is legally required to provide free access across his property? Catherine stood. Your Honor, the CCRs for Oakmont Estates clearly state that common area amenities are for the use and enjoyment of all residents. By charging admission, Mr. Lawson is interfering with that use and enjoyment. But the amenity itself is not on his property, correct? Correct, Your Honor, but the practical access is. Judge Kellerman turned to Marcus. Mr. Chen, your response. Marcus stood confidently. Your Honor, the HOA's own documents show they were aware of the access issue before construction and proceeded anyway. My client has no legal obligation to provide free access across his private property. He's operating a legal, licensed business. The HOA's poor planning does not create an obligation for my client. The judge flipped through the documents in front of him, pausing on the email between Brenda and the contractor. He read it twice, then looked up at Catherine. Miss Rodriguez, this email suggests your client knew there would be access issues. Why did they proceed with construction? Catherine looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, the board believed the common area designation would provide sufficient authority. But it didn't, did it? Because the access point isn't on common area land. No, Your Honor. Judge Kellerman sat back in his chair. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm denying the HOA's request for an injunction. Mr. Lawson has no legal obligation to provide free access across his property. However, I'm also not going to order the HOA to purchase an easement from Mr. Lawson at this time. That's a negotiation between the parties. As for the counterclaim regarding attorney's fees, I'm inclined to grant that based on the evidence of willful negligence by the HOA board. Miss Rodriguez, do you have any objection to your client covering Mr. Lawson's reasonable attorney's fees? Catherine whispered with Brenda and Donald for a moment. Your Honor, could we request a recess to discuss settlement options? You have 30 minutes. We reconvened in a conference room down the hall. Marcus and I sat on one side of the table, Catherine, Brenda, and Donald on the other. Brenda looked like she had been sucking on lemons, her face pinched and sour. Catherine spoke first. We're prepared to make an offer. The HOA will pay your attorney's fees to date and purchase an easement for $30,000. Marcus shook his head before I could respond. $50,000 for the easement plus attorney's fees. That was the original offer and it still stands. Your client has spent months dragging this out, costing money and time for everyone involved. The price hasn't changed. That's unreasonable, Brenda interjected. We don't have $50,000 available. You had $15,000 for attorney's fees to pursue a frivolous lawsuit, Marcus countered. You have the money, you just don't want to admit you made a mistake. Donald cleared his throat. What if we structured it as a payment plan? $50,000 over 2 years. I considered it. 3 years with interest at 5% annually. And the easement agreement is signed immediately, so access remains open during the payment period. Catherine looked at her clients. Brenda looked ready to explode, but Donald nodded slowly. We need to take this to the full board for a vote, Donald said. Can we have until the end of the week? Marcus looked at me and I shrugged. Friday at 5 p.m. After that, we go back before the judge and take our chances with his ruling. We shook hands on it, though Brenda refused to make eye contact with me. Friday afternoon, I received an email from Catherine Rodriguez. The HOA board had voted 4-1 to accept the settlement terms. Brenda had been the only dissenting vote. The easement agreement would be drafted and signed within 2 weeks, with the first payment due immediately upon signing. Marcus and I met with the HOA representatives at a title company on a Wednesday morning in late September. The easement was officially recorded. granting permanent access across a 10-foot strip of my property leading to the dog park. The HOA made the first payment of $16,925, which included the first year's payment plus interest. My attorney's fees of $12,000 were also paid in full. I walked out of that title company feeling vindicated. Not only had I won, but I had done so while following all the rules and laws. The HOA had tried to steamroll me and failed. The gate came down that afternoon. With the easement in place, I no longer had any right to charge admission, but I didn't care. I had made about $18,000 from the gate business over the 6 months it operated, plus I was getting $50,000 from the easement sale plus interest. After legal fees and expenses, I was still ahead by more than $40,000. More importantly, I had proven a point. HOAs couldn't just do whatever they wanted without consequences. They had to follow the rules and respect property rights, just like everyone else. The neighborhood reaction was mixed. Some people congratulated me, saying I had stood up to the HOA's overreach. Others thought I had been petty and money-hungry. Susan Miller brought me a bottle of wine and thanked me for getting the access opened up permanently. "I never minded paying," she said. "But it's nice knowing I don't have to anymore. Plus, you made the HOA think twice before their next bright idea." Brenda resigned from the HOA board in October. According to the neighborhood gossip, she was facing pressure from other board members who blamed her for the expensive dog park debacle. The lawsuit and settlement had cost the HOA nearly $30,000 beyond the easement purchase, money that came from the reserve fund, and resulted in a special assessment of $75 per household. Residents were not happy about paying extra because of Brenda's stubbornness. At the next HOA meeting, she announced her resignation, citing personal reasons. Everyone knew the real reason was that she had become toxic to the community. Donald Hughes took over as interim president and proved to be much more reasonable. He sent me a polite letter apologizing for how the situation had been handled and thanking me for my patience during the resolution process. The dog park became quite popular once access was freely available. On any given evening, you could find a dozen dogs playing in the space, their owners chatting and socializing. Kids would sometimes come to watch the dogs through the fence. It actually did become a nice community amenity, just like it was supposed to be from the start. I ran into Brenda once at the grocery store in November. She was in the produce section, examining tomatoes when she looked up and saw me. Her face hardened immediately. "I hope you're satisfied," she said coldly. "You cost this community thousands of dollars." The HOA cost the community thousands of dollars by building something without proper access. I just protected my property rights. You took advantage of a technicality. I took advantage of your poor planning and refusal to negotiate reasonably. You could have bought the easement on day one for $50,000. Instead, you spent months fighting, hired lawyers, and ended up paying the same price anyway, plus all the extra costs. That was your choice, not mine. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving her cart behind. I never saw her at a neighborhood event again. Life returned to normal as winter approached. The dog park continued to thrive, and I went back to enjoying my corner lot without construction crews or legal battles. The fence I had installed along my property line remained, giving me the privacy I had wanted all along. In December, Donald Hughes knocked on my door with a proposal. The HOA wanted to build a community garden in an empty lot on the other side of the neighborhood. Before proceeding, they wanted to make sure all access points were properly secured and that no residents would be impacted negatively. "We learned our lesson," Donald said with a rueful smile. From now on, we're consulting with affected property owners before we build anything. We're also including access planning in the initial design phase. That sounds like a much smarter approach, I agreed. We were hoping you might be willing to serve on the Architectural Review Committee. Your experience with property law and planning would be valuable. I declined politely. I had no interest in getting involved with HOA politics or decision-making. I had won my battle and proved my point. That was enough. The new year arrived, and with it came the second payment from the HOA for the easement. $16,925 hit my bank account in January, right on schedule. The dog park was now an established part of the neighborhood, used daily by dozens of residents. I occasionally walked past the park in the evenings, watching the dogs play and the owners socialize. It was a good reminder that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when it's unpopular. The HOA had tried to take advantage of a vague clause in the CCRs to build on what was essentially my land without compensation, or even consultation. By installing that gate and charging admission, I had forced them to confront their mistake and make it right. Yes, I had profited from it, but that wasn't really the point. The point was that property rights matter, and even HOAs have to respect them. A new family moved into Brenda's old house in February. They had 2 young kids and an energetic border collie named Pepper. I introduced myself one Saturday afternoon when I saw them exploring the neighborhood. "Welcome to Oakmont Estates," I said. "I'm Peter Lawson. I live at the corner over there." The husband, a friendly guy named Chris, shook my hand. "Thanks. We heard there's a dog park nearby. Right around the corner from my house. Your dog will love it." "That's great." The HOA president mentioned something about there being a controversy about it when we were signing papers, but he said it was all resolved now. I smiled. It was a learning experience for everyone involved. "The park is great, though. You'll get a lot of use out of it." As I walked back to my house, I reflected on how the whole situation had played out. What had started as an unwelcome surprise on a Tuesday morning had turned into a 6-month battle that tested my patience, cost me money and time, but ultimately resulted in a fair outcome. The HOA had learned that they couldn't just bulldoze over property rights in pursuit of community improvements. The residents had learned that HOA boards need to be held accountable for their decisions. And I had learned that sometimes standing up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable and unpopular, is the right thing to do. The third and final payment arrived in January of the following year, completing the easement purchase. $55,475 total, including interest, for a 10-foot strip of land that I had been maintaining anyway, plus the $18,000 or so I had made from the gate admission business. Minus legal fees and expenses, I had netted approximately $45,000, but more valuable than the money was the principle. I had proven that careful planning, knowing your rights and standing firm could prevail against an HOA that overstepped its authority. The dog park still operated successfully, now with proper legal access. The neighborhood had a popular amenity that brought people together, and the HOA had learned a valuable lesson about respecting property rights and consulting with residents before making major decisions. On a warm spring evening, almost exactly 2 years after that construction crew first showed up at my corner lot, I sat on my front porch with a cold beer and watched the sunset. Dogs barked happily in the park around the corner, their owners chatting and laughing. Kids rode bikes past my house. The neighborhood was alive and thriving. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chen. "Saw that the final payment cleared. Congratulations on closing out the case. You ever need a real estate attorney again, you know where to find me." I texted back a thank you and took another sip of my beer. The whole experience had been exhausting, frustrating, and stressful at times, but it had also been oddly satisfying. I had taken a situation where I was being taken advantage of and turned it around through a combination of creativity, persistence, and knowing my rights. The corner lot looked perfect in the golden hour light, my cedar fence casting long shadows across the grass. The dog park beyond was bustling with activity, exactly as the HOA had envisioned, just with a proper legal framework in place. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just making sure everyone plays by the rules and respects each other's rights. The HOA had wanted to build a community amenity on my land without compensation or consultation. I had made sure they did it the right way, even if it took 6 months of conflict and a lawsuit to get there. As I finished my beer and headed inside for dinner, I couldn't help but smile. The dog park was a success, the neighborhood was happy, and I had been fairly compensated for my property. It was a win for everyone, even if Brenda Patterson would never admit it. The story spread beyond Oakmont Estates. Other HOA members from different communities reached out to me, asking for advice on dealing with overreaching boards. I became something of an accidental expert on HOA property disputes, though I never sought out the role. Local news even picked up the story, running a piece about HOA accountability and property rights. The reporter interviewed me, Donald Hughes, and several residents. The segment was balanced, showing both perspectives, but the underlying message was clear. HOAs need to plan better and respect homeowner rights. That media attention led to some changes in Arizona HOA law. State legislators introduced a bill requiring HOAs to obtain written consent from affected property owners before using land adjacent to private property for common area amenities. The bill passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law the following year. I never expected to be part of changing state law, but that's what happened. My little dispute with the Oakmont Estates HOA over a dog park had ripple effects across Arizona, making it harder for HOAs to pull the same stunt in the future. Life continued in its pleasant suburban rhythm. The seasons changed, the dog park remained popular, and my corner lot stayed exactly as I wanted it. Private, peaceful, and properly respected. The HOA continued making improvements to the neighborhood, but now they consulted with affected residents first and ensured all access points were properly secured before breaking ground. Donald Hughes proved to be an excellent HOA president. Under his leadership, the board became more transparent and responsive to resident concerns. They started monthly newsletters, held regular town halls, and actually listened when people raised issues. The special assessment from the dog park debacle remained a sore point for some residents, but most people moved on. The park was used and enjoyed enough that people felt like they eventually got their money's worth, even if the path to get there had been unnecessarily expensive and complicated. As for me, I invested the money from the easement sale wisely, putting most of it into index funds and using some for home improvements. I upgraded my kitchen, replaced the HVAC system, and built a nice patio in the backyard. My house increased in value, and I was happy with my life in Oakmont Estates. The gate hardware remained in my garage, a reminder of the 6 months when I ran the most unusual business in the neighborhood. Sometimes I would look at it and chuckle, remembering the look on Brenda's face when she first saw my admission sign. Years later, I still lived at 2847 Oakmont Drive. The dog park was still there, still popular, still bringing the community together. New families moved in, dogs came and went, but the park remained a constant. And every time I walked past it, I felt a small sense of pride, not because I had charged admission or made money, but because I had stood up for what was right. The HOA had tried to take advantage of a vague CCR clause to use my land without compensation. I had fought back, not with anger or spite, but with creativity and knowledge of my rights. In the end, everyone got what they needed. The neighborhood got a great dog park with proper legal access. The HOA learned to plan better and respect property rights. And I got fair compensation for the use of my land, plus the satisfaction of knowing I hadn't been pushed around. That was worth more than any amount of money. It was about principle, about standing up for yourself, and about making sure that even powerful entities like HOAs have to follow the rules. It was about turning a situation where you're being taken advantage of into an opportunity to assert your rights and create a fair outcome. The dog park story became part of neighborhood lore, passed down to new residents as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of proper planning. Kids growing up in Oakmont estates would hear about the time when you had to pay to use the dog park, and they would laugh at the absurdity of it. But the adults understood. They understood that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. They understood that HOAs, despite their power and authority, are still bound by property law and common sense. And they understood that one person, standing firm on principle, could make a difference. As I sat on my porch on a quiet evening, 5 years after the whole saga began, watching the sun set over my perfectly maintained corner lot, I felt content. The dog park was thriving. The HOA was functioning well under competent leadership. My property values had increased. And I had a great story to tell at parties. Most importantly, I had the satisfaction of knowing that I had stood up for myself and won. Not through aggression or conflict, but through creativity, persistence, and a firm understanding of my rights. The HOA built a dog park on my corner lot, so I installed a gate and started charging admission. It was simple, it was legal, and it worked. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.